Let's go ahead with the Mountain West schools first, Joe. And I'm gonna let you start this one first with Boise State because you actually mentioned something about this earlier this week about the Boise State competition, and it's something that you talked about on our last podcast. So why don't you go ahead and just kind of give us the breakdown of it, then I'll kind of chime in and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, so last podcast we talked about was we mentioned SMU being Tanner Mordecai and Preston Stone as one of the best G5, if not the best G5 quarterback battle this spring. And I brought up that I thought that Boise State would have quite a quarterback battle themselves. And I think this one actually might be the best because both quarterbacks have experience. We're talking Hank Bachmeier, the starter, the normal starter, and then Jack Sears, the USC transfer, who actually played one or two games of significant time last year. The big thing, honestly, I think is Bachmeier's job. It's just a matter of his health, because you look at when he was a freshman, even like his first game against Florida State in Tallahassee, he was just getting slaughtered with hits. And it was just, you worry about that, and the number of hits a quarterback takes is a point that people talk about all the time, and it makes you a little bit worried when your quarterback takes as many shots as he did. But then last year you had Jack Sears there to step up and help out when needed, and we've seen this spring so far early on that it's kind of a neck and neck competition there. I think Bachmeier is definitely the more talented quarterback. He's former 4-star, come into Boise State. And he's got a good frame. And the thing is, even though he takes a ton of shots, his confidence and his poise in the pocket don't get affected. He stands in there and he knows he's going to take a hit and still throws the ball, a nice ball at that too. It throws a lot of nice passes, and I think he'll get the edge in the end. It's just really a matter of, can he stay healthy? And if not, then Sears steps in. But if Bachmeier's healthy, I think it's his job to lose.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I do think it's Bachmeier's job, and I think creating an open competition like this is only going to make both guys better. So I think it's smart for the new coaching staff to do it. They haven't seen these guys, they haven't developed them. So, who are they to come in and say, hey, this is a starter, even though he has been the starter. So I think a few things with Bachmeier and Sears. And Jake, so Sears he started against Air Force, and then I believe he actually started against BYU and got hurt. So he was out kind of that game. But his start against Air Force, he was like 17-20, had 4 total touchdowns, and showed some stuff on the ground in the air too. So I think that start earned him enough kind of recognition where he's getting the chance to compete with Hank Bachmeier. But I agree with your points on Bachmeier, just tough as nails, right? And he has all the tools that he needs. And you referenced Florida State. I'm going to reference another game. It was this past year. It was against Wyoming, and it was a freaking snowstorm. I don't know if you remember that game, but the fact that he's able to throw the ball downfield in that type of weather, and the fact that he's able to keep the passing game alive, if you will, it wasn't like a crazy impressive statistical game, but the passing game still had an effect on that game. It was still a reason why they won, because he could simply complete passes in that bad weather. So that especially playing in that conference, that is that's something, that you're going to be exposed against, is this bad weather. It's like a second defense hitting you. So, and he's a very talented guy. He pushes the ball downfield, has a career average of over 8, which is a pretty good number for all our quarterback heads out there. So I think if you can just take that next step, it's big. And I want to say a quote from their new OC, Tim Plow. Do you know how to pronounce that last name? Am I butchering that? Probably.
I don't know. I'm not familiar. That coaching staff's so new that I still haven't looked at that.
Usually I rely on Eric to correct me. He's a journalist guy. I can get away with being wrong, but we'll have him chime in at some point. But so this quote comes from the Idaho Statesman, which I'm assuming is a newspaper up there, and the author Ron Counts, I believe, is the writer of this. And here's a quote from the new OC. He says, "What I love about Hank is he can win games in multiple ways. Yes, he can win games with his mind. He's tough as nails, like we just talked about. He can make all the throws. Jack is a guy who can really move and be athletic, but he can make all the throws from the pocket as well. So it seems like we got similar quarterbacks who can both spin it and are tough guys who have enough athleticism to hurt the defense." And then one more quote from actually Sears, which kind of shows the camaraderie between the quarterbacks. He says, "There's never any bad blood or hard feelings. When he throws a touchdown, I celebrate. When I throw a touchdown, he celebrates. We just like seeing how far we can push each other." And I think we got a lot better from it. So that kind of goes back to my original point where I do think it's Bachmeier's job to lose. Like you said, I do think he's the more talented guy, at least according to, what the recruiting analysts tell us. But I think the competition is making them better, right? It's kind of sharpening their edge, if you will. So I think you're right. It's probably the most talented competition from the group of 5 level.
Yeah, agreed. And I like that that's kind of their mentality because in college you start to get to see more of the alpha mentality of like, it's my job and I don't care who's coming for it. I'm not going to let them win it. And then if people do lose it, you've seen in the past, the guys are just tune out or they're like, well, I don't want to. I think the most prolific example of this is at Alabama when they had Tua and Jalen Hurts. And when Tua came in that national championship game, they showed the sideline and Jalen's the first one celebrating and getting excited for him. And then the next year when Tua got hurt and Jalen had to come in, the first guy to go greet him after a big play was Tua. And it's nice to see that. And I wish more players could do that, have that mentality. Because I think that honestly, even though you might not be winning the job, being positive about that competition is going to make you better. Like you said, competition is going to make both guys better. And we'll talk about that. I kind of have some points when we talk about Houston about that. But yeah, I think they're both talented guys. There's no reason for either of them to be upset that the other one's getting reps. I mean, they both deserve to get reps. But I'm glad that they're both, excited for the other person. And when someone does something good, they're able to celebrate even while they're competing against each other.
No, I agree with that point. It is cool to see. That's why, whoever wins, and we both think Bachmeier will end up winning, both guys will get better from it. So definitely will be a fun competition to watch during spring, and we'll see if they name a starter. And if not, then we'll keep up in the fall. Let's go ahead and move to the other Mountain West school we're going to talk about, Utah State. So this is something I'll start off here on this one, Joe, and then let you piggyback and dive into it. But this is one that anyone that's listened to our podcast or watched our YouTube knows. We talked a lot about Logan Bonner the past few years, essentially, and he's not being in a quarterback competition is no strange feeling for him, right? He's been in a competition the past few years, Arkansas State, splitting time with Lane Hatcher last year, right? So he's technically a 2-year starter, even though he got hurt in 2019. And then 2020 rolls around, and he splits time with the Sun Belt co-freshman player of the year, I think, in Lane Hatcher. And so going into a competition with Andrew Peasley from Utah State, it is not something that he's going to like defer him or kind of discourage him. Now, I will say off the bat, he hasn't practiced yet in spring ball, and I will reference someone that's kind of has ears in the program or keeps up with the program on Twitter. They have a great Utah State podcast called Aggie Up Podcast. I don't know if you've seen them around. They do a good job covering Utah State football. So Logan Bonner has not practiced yet. So that tells me Peasy's getting these reps. He's getting the reps with Blake Anderson's new offense, and he's kind of getting to learn the schemes. And I think that's okay for Bonner because he's been in Blake Anderson's offense and scheme his entire career, and he's had success. 31 total touchdowns, over 3,000 yards passing. Like, he has the experience. Andrew Peasley started the last 2 games last year, and so he doesn't have quite as much experience, but at least he did get that playing time, which is valuable, and he showed to be a pretty good athlete as well. So I think this is helping Peasley kind of catch up, if you will, with the learning curve, since Bonner is not there. I don't know if he's supposed to come back this spring or not. I'm not quite sure. But I don't think it's too big of a deal, Bonner missing reps, because he knows the offensive system. As long as he's able to get in there this summer and kind of get the feel with the guys. I don't have a great read who's going to start. To like Peasley, if I had to guess, I would say Bonner, because he's experienced in his relationship and with the offensive scheme. But again, Peasley was a guy that had talented and looked like he could be developed. So this is going to be an interesting one to keep track of for sure in the Mountain West.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for Bonner is there's 2 things. There's his familiarity with the system, and on top of that, his familiarity with Blake Anderson and what he expects from his quarterbacks and kind of the intricacies of playing the position. Because, usually we look at a quarterback transferring in and he's not following a coach. He comes into a new system. So he's an experienced quarterback, but he also has to learn a new system. This is different because Bonner's going to a new school, but he's joining the coach that he just played for. So he doesn't have to learn that stuff. There might be some additions that he has to learn that they put in the spring, but usually spring ball is pretty basic, vanilla stuff. So you're not really missing a ton, like you said. But yeah, for Peasley to get those reps is really good. I think the other thing that Bonner is doing that's going to work for him is that he's used to being in a quarterback competition. He's been doing that for years, and while it's good for him to go to a new school, I think it was good for him and Hatcher to kind of battle it out. But I think after a certain point, like, you lose momentum during a game when you're constantly switching quarterbacks. It didn't feel like either guy is really getting in rhythm. So it's going to be good, I think, for both guys to kind of move on. Obviously, Hatcher stays at Arkansas State, but he has a new coach. Bonner follows Anderson to Utah State. So I think the change for both of them is going to be beneficial. But Bonner's used to being in a quarterback competition, so that's really not going to phase him. I think that's another thing that he has going for him. So even if Peasley's, a little bit better, I think that Bonner is going to win the job because, he's familiar with, like I said, with the system and what Anderson expects out of his quarterbacks. And it's not a new situation for him to go in and have to beat another guy out. So I think just for those two reasons alone, I'm picking Bonner, and it'll be nice to see what he can do when it's his offense and it's, he's the guy and there's not really any doubt about who's QB1. Is another guy to kind of come in if he struggles for a little bit, or is there, he doesn't have to worry about that rotation that kind of hurt both him and Hatcher last year.
Yeah, and another interesting thing is I would imagine, I don't want to assume, but I would imagine Coach Anderson doesn't want to have that two quarterback system again, like he had at Arkansas State. So I would imagine he wants to have a clear-cut guy. And like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if Bonner ends up being that guy because he's familiar with it. But I don't want to root – like, Peasley's a talented guy who I think has a lot of good tools and raw tools to work with and develop. If he was a starter all last year for Utah State, they would have had a much different season. I know they had coaching stuff go on, but Utah State's an interesting position because they had Jordan Love for several years with elite quarterback play, and then just the drop off that happened last year. So I'm not saying they're going to get back to Jordan Love play, but they need to at least take a step towards that direction to be competitive again in the Mountain West, because they have talent around them, right? They just need to get that quarterback situation solidified. All right, so that's all the Mountain West talk we got for today. Let's go ahead and dive into Eric's favorite conference, Western Kentucky. And you know what we should have done? We should have talked FIU tonight, just with Eric being gone, but that would have been rude. He probably would have had some snarky comment. But Western Kentucky, I don't know how much of a true competition it really is. I imagine it's like me and Eric have talked about in the past. There are competitions where it's truly open, and hey, they're like, I don't know who's going to win this. Like, it's a truly open competition. Like the Logan Bonner, Andrew Peasley, we lean towards Bonner, but I feel like it's a truly open competition, right? I feel like this one may be a little more saying, hey, like, it's a competition, but in the back of the coach's mind, it's like, hey, Bailey Zappe's probably our guy, right? Like, they brought him in for a reason. Their OC, his receivers. The guy could have gone to probably bigger, like a Power 5 program, probably done well, right? He put up huge numbers against 3 FBS schools last year, and he's on NFL radars, right? And I don't want to take a shot at Tyrell Pigrome, but Pigrome struggled with consistency last year. Western Kentucky fans would be the first to tell you that. The thing Pigrome has going for him is he has a different skill set. He's able to use his legs, and he does take care of the football. Only threw 2 picks last year, but Zappe only threw 1 pick last year, right, with 15 touchdowns. So while Pigrome does have his athleticism and has experience at Western Kentucky, it's a new offensive system. Zappe's familiar with it, and he's only gotten better each and every year. Like, Zappe is very coachable. He hasn't even hit a ceiling yet, but he's gotten better each and every year. So I think it's Zappe's job, but I think going in, you can't just say he's the guy. You have to have that open competition.
Yeah, I think they're going to do the best thing. I think for them is to tailor that offense around Zappe's game. You look at the lowest amount of passing attempts he took was 46 last year against Eastern Kentucky. Then he throws for 58 against Louisiana Tech, 49 against Texas Tech, and 62 against North Texas. It's not exactly a focus on the run, but I think that if you're trying to get one of these two quarterbacks in the rhythm of the game, trying to get the offense to work around one of their skill sets, I feel like you have to go with Zappe's skill set, throw the ball around a lot. And then when you can, bring Pigram in and, use kind of like the wildcat offense that a lot of teams like to do, use his legs, but also know that he can throw the football too. I just think that's more beneficial than going the other way where you run more of like an RPO offense around, where it's really more run or even like a lot of read option stuff with Pigram. I think that doesn't really work well for Zappe, and it just doesn't make sense to bring him in just so you can run the ball when obviously he can throw the ball with the best of. I mean, like you said, he threw 15 touchdowns in just one pick, and that's throwing the ball 215 times in 4 games. That's not a skill set that you just bring in and then say, hey, we're going to run the ball. We're not going to use your arm as much. Like, there's a reason why he's coming in. And while, yeah, I agree that this isn't really as much of a quarterback competition, but I think that having Zappe there will also elevate Pigram's passing because he'll see this is what it looks like and this is what we want. So if you can try to replicate that as best you can, you're also going to improve. And then if you do improve as a passer, your running game just takes off from there because like you said, he's a great athlete. He can use his legs, but if you can't throw the football, they're just going to stack the box and there's nowhere for you to go.
Yeah, and in Pigram's defense, like, COVID would probably hurt him just as much as any other transfer quarterback who wasn't able to get in the system. And so, like, it's like the first few games are almost like figuring it out last year, right? And then he was benched some off and on. So, but yeah, I do definitely think it's Zappe's. I think Zappe is a difference maker for Western Kentucky. Like, I think because they have a good defense, I think he could, and maybe this is the quarterback bias coming out in me, right? But I think he could take Western Kentucky and make them contend for a CUSA title. And I know, you keep up with CUSA a lot like we do being with Underdog Dynasty. But I just view that offense with Zappe, if it's 3/4 of what it was at HBU, they all of a sudden are one of the most explosive offenses in Conference USA. There's not a ton of solid defenses in Conference USA besides like a FAU, Marshall. And so I think they can take advantage of, being in conference and I think they can make a run for it if Zappe comes in as advertised. So I'm definitely excited for that. Bailey Zappe is someone, not to jump like if he's someone like Eric's been huge on. He's the one that got him on my radar. So I think he's going to be big for Conference USA. I know you're kind of getting super excited for this next school, Joe, kind of the school you cover. So I'm gonna let you go and just take it away here and kind of give the listeners any U of H fans that come. Here's your guy to talk U of H football.
Yeah, I think that Houston fans have been very sick of the last few years and how they've went, and I think that guys are getting or people are getting sick of Dana Holgerson already, which doesn't make any sense to me because you bring in a guy who's taken over a program that wasn't good, like. No offense to Major Applewhite, but the guys that he was bringing in just didn't cut it. And, there are a handful of guys like Peyton Turner and Clayton Tune, who I'll talk about in a second, that are good on each side of the ball. And there's a lot of guys that just weren't good, didn't provide enough depth. And I think there's a lot of issues that people didn't realize. And they just expect that. The tough thing with college football is that coaches come in and usually we see they get 2, 3, maybe 4 years to prove this is what I'm going to do. And then to actually prove that they can get results. And I think that people at Houston had the mentality that Dana Holgerson needs to turn Clayton Tune into this Case Keenum, Derek King type quarterback, and that just wasn't the case. It never was going to be, and it's not going to be this year either. Clayton Tune's not either of those quarterbacks. But I think year 3, now that Dana's gotten 2 years of recruiting classes and bringing his guys in, it's going to be the first year that Houston fans should actually judge how he's doing. And it's going to start with Clayton Tune. So Tune's obviously had his moments where he struggled. Decision-making is probably his biggest weakness at times when he's getting all this pressure, which he's received a lot of pressure because the offensive line hasn't been great. But when you get pressure in your face, it kind of exposes you and how much poise you have. And there are times where Tune's an underrated athlete. He can run. It's kind of like Dylan Gabriel we talked last time, underrated athlete who can run the football, but it's kind of hard to do that when you have 2 defensive tackles in your face within 2 seconds of getting the football. And while sometimes he just needs to eat and take a sack, there's times where he just decides, I'm just going to throw the ball somewhere And, we saw in the Tulane game, their first game, the first one he throws away, but he doesn't really throw it away because he's trying to make a play, and Tulane brings back for a pick six. Next, there's another turnover he has. He's not really paying attention to the pressure, gets the ball stripped from him. Tulane scores again. It's kind of that internal clock, but also the awareness to know, like, I just need to throw it away. Yeah, it sucks that I have to take a sack, but I'm going to take a sack. And I think that Dana Holgerson would be wise to let Sofian Massoud and Maddox Kopp be a part of that competition. They might not get a ton of first team reps, but just show Tune like, hey, you have to compete for your spot. You can't just assume that you're going to be the winner. And I honestly think that's going to be good. Now, I don't think that Dana's going to be like, hey, you might lose out to one of these guys, but at least just light a fire under him and show that you need to do better. And while, yes, there are things around you that also need to get better, you're the quarterback and you have the biggest impact on an offense. So it's going to be good for both of the other guys to come in. And, Maddox Kopp is 6'5", has great arm, and he's a guy that's going to be a good quarterback for Houston. Even Massoud too I think he's going to be good. They both fit what Dana wants to do. But for right now, Clayton Tune's the guy. And while he's solidified in his job, that doesn't mean that he can't get a little fire under him and show, hey, if you're not cutting it, we're not afraid to go to these guys. And that gives those guys confidence too, to say, hey, if our guy's not cutting it, we're going to go to one of you and you better be ready.
Hi, Joe. I got a few things. Number one, I'm a degenerate gambler. And so the fact you brought that U of H Tulane game was heartbreaking for two reasons. I'm going to go back 2 years ago when King was still the quarterback and they were playing at Tulane. I'm sure you remember how this lost. But U of H was starting off bad, and I took U of H in the points. I was like, they're going to turn it around here. They're up 24-7 at half. I'm like, this is a no-brainer. This is easy. Boom. Tulane comes back. I'm like, what is going on? But I'm like, no big deal. Like, I think U of H had to lose by I think I took U of H +4. So I was like, okay, it's going to overtime. Like, this sucks. Like, I still think U of H can win. Maybe at least Tulane can just kick a field goal and be done. So I'm like, okay, they still blew it, but whatever. And then the freaking Hail Mary happens, and my heart is just ripped from me. I'm like, okay, that was one of my worst gambling experiences in my life. Fast forward to 2020, Tulane's the underdog. I think it was almost 2 touchdowns. It was like +13, +12. I took Tulane, and Tulane gets up by 3 scores or so the first quarter. Was it 21-0? Something like that. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, it was bad.
I was like, solid. This is great. I was like, even if U of H comes back, surely, the offense that wasn't looking very good, I was like, surely Tulane can at least get another touchdown or two and keep it within 2 touchdowns. Like, there's no way. We're up 3 scores. Long story short, it's like a 48-20-something type game. And, again, I get wrecked again. That was atrocious. But no one cares about my gambling losses besides my wife. But back to the quarterback play, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think Tune has a good opportunity to take the next step in the AAC. You have Brady White leaving, Shane Buechele leaving. All you have at the top, established guys at the top, is Dylan Gabriel and Desmond Ritter. They are the only established top tier guys. You have others like Holton Ahlers and the other guys like Michael Pratt who are established in their own right, but they're not at the top by any means. And so I think Clayton Tune has the ability to take that next step and take where Brady White was. Shane Buechele was push that next step if he is able to take the next step, right? It's there. So I think it's almost like a passing of the torch for the American Conference, if you will. There's going to be several quarterbacks that can take that next step, and Tune can be one of those guys. And like you said, maybe having these younger guys, and Maddox Kopp, we're both very high on, maybe having these younger guys getting some reps with the ones and just kind of pushing him a little bit, but then also letting him know and letting the backups know, hey, if Tune's struggling 3 or 4 or 5 games into it, it's just not getting the job done, it's just kind of average, mediocre play, we have different options. But at the same time, I think, like you mentioned this earlier, Tune has gotten too much, I think, criticism towards his way, like most quarterbacks do, where it hasn't been all his fault, right? It's just they expect him to be what these quarterbacks in the past have been for U of H, and sometimes it's not feasible. You can still be a good quarterback without being, King, Case Keenum. So I think he's in a good position to take the next step. I hope he does. And plus, U of H always has athletes. You're always going to have receivers. You're always going to have playmakers around you. It's the great state of Texas, right? So you're set there. But I think U of H fans have reason to be optimistic. not just whether Tune takes the next step or not. I think the quarterback room is developing, right? It is interesting that Holgerson's son transferred, though, right? He's in the portal.
Yeah, yep, he is. I'm not really surprised though. I think with the writing on the wall was that he wasn't going to be the guy. It didn't really get many opportunities last year, so I'm not really surprised there. I tell you what though, whoever, if he when he goes somewhere, or if he does go somewhere, I think that you're getting a great teammate. I hear a lot of coaches say that they like coaches' sons because they're taught from an early age that they're a team player and they're trained to be the right kind of player, right kind of teammate. And if you go back and watch Houston's season and you see a big play, you're going to see number 6 just hyping it up, waving a towel. He's the first guy to get in Tune's face when he makes a play. So if wherever Logan Holgerson lands, they're going to get at minimum one of the best teammates on the roster right away. He loves the game. He loves his teammates. And that's a guy that, I'm not surprised because he wasn't playing very much, but at a minimum, you're getting a positive influence in the locker room.
Yeah. All the U of H inside guys. So anyone with any U of H questions, please direct them towards Joe. If you ask me, I'll direct you towards Joe. But I think that's all we got, Joe. Any other quarterbacks we missed for the show? Anything you want to jump back into, or we chew on it pretty good?
No, we chew pretty good. I think we got a good little conversation going. It's a little different without Eric, but we managed.
Man, we got through it, right? He'll come critique us and give us some notes of what to improve on, I'm sure. But guys, thanks for listening. That's all we got for today. Again, Joe, tell everyone where they can find you in your work.
You can find me at Joe Broback, Underdog Dynasty at Underdog Dynasty, 6 Year Sports at 6 Year Sports on Twitter and pretty much anywhere on social media. That's where you're going to find us.
Joe's got some cool stuff. So give him a follow. Keep track of what he's doing. He's got some cool stuff going on and coming out. Again, thanks for listening, guys. Again, you can find us on Spotify, Apple, all that podcast stuff. At QB Spotlight is the Twitter, and we will have this on YouTube as well. Any questions, suggestions, please send them our way. And like always, if it's negative, send it towards Eric because he deserves it. Any positive stuff, send towards us. Thank y'all, and we'll see y'all next time.